Okay, hello everybody. This is today the 5th session of NFA Lab, and I'm super happy to welcome Sasha, Sean, and Ben, an architect, artist, developer collective titled iheartblob. The session is going to have a short introduction of the three candidates. And then we'll go through a few of the questions that they're going to answer with images. So iheartblob is an award-winning architectural design studio. Interestingly architectural, but I also think their work is extremely interesting because it's not just everybody has an architectural background, but on their Instagram they're called Extended Reality Design Studio. They're looking at game development, they're looking at novel mediums and technologies. The collective is formed by Aleksandra Belitskaja, Ben James, and Shaun McCallum. Sasha is a game developer. She is looking at new forms of connectivity, participation through novel digital mediums. Ben is based in Vienna. He's focusing on AI, machine learning. He has a background in economics and is running a successful company in Vienna focusing on AI and its implementation into the world. And Sean, also an architect, looking at ephemeral architectural objects through the lens of new technologies, especially with a focus on augmented reality. He is also an academic in thought at UCLA. What's also interesting, of course, what brings us together is that all three of you have a background in architecture in Vienna at the Angewandte Studio Greg Lynn. So I'm super happy you guys are here and found time to answer a few of my questions. And maybe we start something that's always on my mind, like why iheartblob? Like, what are the intentions, the objectives? How did this successful journey start? And what is it that drives the work that you guys are doing?
I guess from the beginning, we started as essentially an Instagram page, I guess is the best way to put it. And for us, it was a way to kind of challenge our own skills, challenge architectural thought, and challenge kind of new ways of thinking about architecture in general. So part of it was technology-based. How can we explore new technologies like AR, VR, AI, and a number of other kind of just general rendering tools and procedural generation tools. So that's kind of like what we started with. And on a daily basis, we try to produce both an image or a video alongside a short form piece of text. And the text was aimed to be quite provocative. It basically set out a question. It had some quite verbose responses that are often criticized or controversial with other kind of creators and architects and philosophers. But the whole idea was for us to kind of start this process of conversation with other creatives, and then also challenge what we were understanding and learning about architectural thought and architectural thinking.
It's amazing the discipline you bring forward when you talk about almost like a daily ritual, producing these images and these texts, almost like taking like a morning run.
Yeah, that was a great way to kind of train that creative muscle, to have that routine and kind of make yourself do certain things at certain times of the day. And I think that's helped us form our conceptual thoughts and style we were working in. And yeah, that's kind of body of work helped us to create a portfolio that kind of drove other projects and commissions.
And I also think what's especially thoughtful is that in this world of oversaturated images, there were conceptual thoughts, provocations behind these images. So I think that shows of quite an intellectual curiosity, because I think we see a lot of images being produced, but they consumed in a very fast manner. But I think with you guys, it's interesting that it's there's also thought attached to it.
I think also though we've always really embraced that.
I'm back. My Zoom just completely disappeared.
Yeah, you're back.
I think we've always kind of embraced that oversaturation to some extent. Like, I think that's one of the interesting things maybe that we started in social media, that we started in digital media, that we've always kind of, just embraced kind of the nature of digital content, the quickly consumable nature of digital content. And I think in many ways, I suppose some of the stuff we will talk about, some of the projects we've engaged with have furthered that line of thinking, trying to figure out what does architecture, form, and theory look like in a post-digital age, in an age when people consume massive amounts of content, when it's capable of generating content, when you're dealing with kind of these new tools. So I think, like, in many ways, the way that we started the project, although it wasn't thought of that way at the time, had a very fundamental role in faith in our trajectory for continuing digital content in a certain way.
Maybe we go. This is a good overstretch to the first project. NFA Lab, this little curated think tank, really tries to look at the connection of a broader spectrum of new technologies, but always related to the design world. Many times architects, in the case, who strategize on, from new economies to NFT marketplaces to virtual worlds and new technologies. So I find it quite interesting, apparent in your recent work, that NFTs have started to play an important role. I think sometimes there is a brute capitalist ethos in the way NFTs are disrupting existing markets. So for me, it was a very pleasant and one of the rare few projects where creativity in the project was used to use NFTs in a meaningful way. Clearly, you are disrupting, of course, other hierarchies, so you're making provocations. So could you briefly hint at the incentives and the concepts enabled through NFTs in this architectural project of yours in Estonia? Oh, and I need to enable.
Yeah, maybe I can share my screen. Give it seconds. I'll share my screen at a point. So, okay. Sorry, I have two screens here and I'm moving around. I don't want to show you the project just yet, but I can show you kind of the introduction as to what the project was about. So we started this project called Fungible Non-Fungible. It's the Tallinn Architecture Biennale, essentially, pavilion there in Estonia. And what we did was we set up a process in which the community could design and produce essentially architecture collectively and collaboratively. So we designed a platform, which was this web application that allowed you to design in kind of very small Minecraft-esque blocks. So we built this and connected with object.com, which is this really big NFT marketplace for the Tezos blockchain. At the time, Ethereum hadn't transitioned to ETH 2.0. So we were kind of looking for something that was quite environmentally friendly, had relatively cheap minting costs, cheap gas fees, because we wanted to have as many people as possible participate, essentially. So the more people we can have to participate, the more kind of fruitful and more equitable the process would be. So the main kind of constraints were, like, can we make it as simple as possible? Hence this kind of Minecraft-esque building tool that you go on, you click a few blocks, you can produce a little object, and then these objects essentially become an aggregation of parts for the overall pavilion. There's a few constraints. You have a certain amount of wood in which to use. From memory, it was 2.1 meters length maximum, and you have a set amount of colors essentially as well. So the set amount of colors allows to keep relative consistency for the architect, i.e. us, but it also provides a level of freedom in order for the community to design something that they're happy with, something that they're kind of proud of in some way as well. Especially because we really love this idea of being able to give the public a way to showcase their own kind of expression in some way, their own expression, but also to dictate and have the agency to design what actually exists within their city. So although it's only in a small pavilion, it's still front and center in the center of Tallinn. It's very noticeable, very noticeable. And it's going to be there for the next 4 years at a minimum. So it's something we want the people of Tallinn to be proud of, but we also wanted to allow everyone to kind of be part of that process. So we've had people in their 60s, people that are like 5 mint some of these NFTs. And the process was just like make it as simple as possible for everyone. And I guess that's kind of the steps that we went to kind of build into NFTs and kind of the outcome, I guess, of some of the exploration that we were having with NFTs.
It's super smart how this technology is being used in order to, involve a larger civic realm and user participation and co-design. A lot of these terminologies that today are sometimes difficult to bring in all of them into one project. So I think especially that part was super nice in this project. Okay, my next question goes to Sasha. You also produce, as one can see on your website, a large amount of personal works that are available as NFTs, which seem to have a beautiful and contemporary language and aesthetics. How does this relate to space and architecture to you? I'm curious here to see how you also see yourselves, all three, in a larger design studio and the design world today. Your backgrounds is all architecture. iheartblob is titled an extended reality design studio, and some of the work has a very artistic nature. So there is a fluctuation between art, architecture, new mediums. Is this a benefit or a difficulty today? And how does your education play a role in maybe defining this spectrum for you?
Can you see my screen?
No, we see Shaun's.
Oh.
I think. Now. Yeah.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm doing a bunch of NFT work, and in a way, it's liberating that you don't have to be confined by just architecture. Architecture has a lot of rules, a lot of premise, briefs, gravity rules, even within the digital architecture. So in a way, NFT digital artwork is in a way that there's not really confinement of what you can explore. So this really helped me to explore other things that I'm interested in. And I guess in architecture, it taught me how to create, design things, not particularly buildings. So objects, buildings, but I kind of transferred more into abstract animated world. A lot exploration about characters, identity within this digital realm and what it looks like. So a lot of it is kind of like aesthetics. What I see would be prevalent within the metaverse world when it becomes a normal thing. So yeah, a lot of explorations for that. And I think most recently, I also released a collection more related to architecture. So it's about the spaces. And it's also immersive. So you're able to launch the experience in your browser and kind of walk around it. So I guess that's kind of relating back to architecture, but at the same time, relating back to my style and my current interests of abstract worlds, the new aesthetics, and kind of like non-confinements and non-rules of the NFT world, unlike architecture.
I also think what relates the work that we see that you present to architecture is a unified language. And I think that that's also something that you see in the work of great architects, even though it might be diverse in typology, scale, and function. There is something common to them that relates it all back to a certain kind of language, a certain kind of conceptual approach. And I think that this is very evident in the work. So I think that's also quite a nice connection to maybe that really comes out of the education of an architect.
Yeah, totally. Like you can see, especially right now in all industries, you can see a bunch of architects kind of changing their professions rather than traditional architects. So there's definitely kind of like workflow you can, or like the rules you can see that people are able to do other jobs that other industries also need.
My next question is related to the phygital, this hybrid world between the digital and the physical, where you've done really amazing work with the Blob House or the Arc de Blob. And before we dive into the fully immersive worlds detached from our physical presence, let's quickly chat about these hybrids, especially using augmented reality, complementing, but also completing the physical designs in these one competitions for the Winter Pavilion in Vancouver. What inspired this project and the use of the digital medium? And how do you think about the benefits for designers and people experiencing the work? And what's also, of course, always on the table, and we see Apple's headset being continuously postponed, but where do you think, like, what's your intuition about the future applications of this medium in the design world or in the everyday world of everybody?
I can speak maybe a little bit to some of these projects because they probably fall under a certain theme for us, that a lot of these projects that you just mentioned were done either during COVID or sort of around that period. And one of the things that we often were trying to do is create digital senses of place and community through the connection of physical objects with digital media. So we would vary the different types of interactions that we could do, but the overarching thematic connection was that you could connect between yourself and the physical object. So you could, for example, here, extend that physical object, understand kind of digital transformations that could be taking place. And in this particular case, it was a little bit of a play on some of the architectural forms and how they get recomposed into different more kind of interesting mediums within a digital situation. But in some of the other cases, and in this one, you could also leave comments within digital space that other members, people using the app, could then see and experience. And so that was kind of a nice way that you could still, even though you, at these times in Canada, you couldn't be physically close to each other, you would still be able to actually write messages and see who else had been there and leave your digital footprint that was some way connected with physical pieces and tied to the architecture. And then as an architect or as a set of designers, the brief became so much more open because you were dealing with traditional ideas that we study as architects in terms of space and in terms of connecting people and movement and perception. But you were doing that in a hybrid sense, that it wasn't only going to be that physical piece that was being built and placed on site. It was going to be then the way that people were experiencing that piece through the accompaniment of augmented reality content. So I think that was kind of maybe thematically something that tied a lot of work during that period and still does in most of the pieces that we do.
Yeah,
I think.
Sorry.
No, you go.
No, I just want to comment, like, it's definitely still, I think, something that is a big ambition of designers itself to to form communities and bring people together through their work. It was a special case during COVID times, but I also think it's very relevant even today.
Yeah, I think maybe to show some imagery from Ben's point of connecting people together, one project from the winter stations that we done 3 projects working with AR, the community, and small pavilions in Toronto and Vancouver. And one of them was Noodle Feed, which essentially was a 3-dimensionalized news feed or like Facebook feed, as kind of the way that we were thinking about it, that was digitally and physically attached to this noodle structure within Toronto on the beach. One of the really nice things was, like Ben said, we were able to leave these kind of notes or memories behind. And one key focus was this idea of creating like a digital sense of place. So what we found was a lot of people came to the site, reorganized the noodles essentially. But then on top of that, they left behind memories or photographs of them with their kids, with their dogs. And it was actually like this really nice experience because the pavilion was temporary, so it only lasted 6 weeks or something. But now, because we built this AR experience on top of it, you can still go back and kind of relive a small moment of that memory of people hanging out, chilling with their kids, with their family, their friends, their dogs. So there is this kind of like digital space that is still inhabiting the beach in Toronto of a memory from 2000 and I think it was early 2020. So it's really nice. Like it was really nice being there to see all the people kind of hang around and like have fun together. It's really great.
That's nice. So maybe with the last questions, and there is a progression in the projects, I think we're turning now to something that seems to have to reach momentum today, what I tend to call speculative worlds, fully immersive, spatially detached from the physical presence. And speculative for the reason, because I think we're still trying to figure out why these extended spatialities will be necessary in our future endeavors. Or also what opportunities will arise of them. Clearly, I think today that there is a sort of marketing, advertisement machines extending existing business models. And everybody feels the necessity to be represented. Well-known offices put down their virtual landmarks and buildings. And architects in general seem to be quite in a high demand. So there's a lot happening. And because you also have Spaces, the immersive project, also available as NFT on Rarible, and you coined it the 9 Square City, which I find is really interesting. I would be curious to hear more about the ideas behind this project, the opportunities for architects in virtual worlds in general, in your opinion, and if you agree that in future these virtual spaces will need the competencies of architects or architecture per se, or if you rather prefer these worlds to be developed by everybody.
Yeah, I guess for us, Spaces was about introducing the alternative ideas for architects, that it's possible for them to be just doing that rather than physical buildings. It was at the start of the pandemic, and we all were having Zoom fatigue. We're spending all our times on the computers, staring at the 2D screens, and we quickly realized that there's lack of physical spaces or like digital spaces that our brains thinks it's physical. So basically, we need to be in something spatial to be comfortable, to be cognitively comfortable. So this way, we design this city that is carrying some familiar elements like arches, columns, symmetry, like you would see in a traditional city, but it carries as well the digital aesthetic of colors, toon shaders, animations, So kind of two worlds come together, and it's also minted on blockchain, which means anyone is able to own it, and anyone is able to buy and resell it. So introducing this kind of alternative economy and funding methods for architects as well. And we definitely see it right now that there's a lot of demand of digital spatial immersive worlds, especially right now with the metaverse boom and just being able to house these events like business calls or Zoom meetings. It's just nicer and more productive when it's spatial. Yeah, anything else you guys want to add?
Maybe to your question about what's the role of architects within these digital spaces as well, I think we try to explore it in a couple of different mechanisms, but I think probably something that we would all agree with on our side is that the role of the architect is changing to one that's more of a systems designer in many respects. So like architects do have a fundamentally important role in building up digital spaces, but I think there is a world where the demand for digital spaces in the future is so monumental that that's not really going to be something that traditional architecture practice may necessarily be able to keep up with. And you have a whole sort of creative community that's fully capable of making super interesting digital places if they're given the right tools and the right platforms to do so. So I think in some respects, maybe the role of the architect is still equally important, but it's changed as to be one that facilitates people in creating their own spaces. And I think that's something that in multiple projects we've tried to explore is how does that role of the architect remain equally relevant or even more so in a digital realm.
Especially also probably taking into account this notion of the system designer, that with the help of AI, the idea of the work and the output of the work gets accelerated exponentially these days. No, there's just so much debate about replacement of draftspeople, replacement of designers in general. And I think I always relate the fear of replacement to the revolution of using industrial robots in fabrication and car companies. I don't think you replace, but you shift. And I think I like the notion of you saying, well, architects will need to evolve and maybe evolve or emancipate themselves from the singular architectural designer to more of a system thinker. It's a really nice way of putting it.
It's a reference that I guess all of us on this call would know well, but I think there was something interesting said by Greg Lynn, which was that when he was introducing computation into architecture design, he was told, okay, sounds like a great tool that will just help people draw the plans faster. And that was where everyone saw the limitation of that tool. They didn't see that it would go into creating parametric design, creating forms, and creating new types of architecture structures that would not simply have been possible without the addition of computation there. And so I think, the tools that we're exploring now, AR, AI, and all of these digital sculpting, VR sculpting practices probably have similar things where the limitations that we imagine they have today are going to be seemingly trivial in 5 to 10 years.
Okay, my last question is asking for advice for, let's say, a younger generation still in academia. Your Instagram account has a whopping 10K following community. You seem to be at the right place in the right time, producing an incredible amount of diverse work. So, and I'm asking this question to almost all of my candidates. What would your advice be for the people who look up to your work? how should they, what is the competencies that they need to learn, and how should they engage and find opportunities in their future endeavors and practice?
I think it's incredibly important for especially young architects or people in academia still as students. I think it's really important to continually challenge the way that you make things, the way that you think about things. And I don't think there's one particular tool or program or anything like this that you should be aiming towards, but I think it's always about being thoughtful and also just continue to challenge what you already know, be inquisitive. I think that's super important. And I think one of probably the most important tools for anyone within academia is like learning to learn. I think you don't need to kind of just consume content to actually understand it. I think you can produce content to understand it. So through the act of production, I think you can learn a lot more than just like reading or listening. So I think, yeah, the more work you're producing, the more exploration you can do, and the more you can challenge yourself and the kind of constraints of architecture today.
Okay, great. I think that's a great closure. Ben, Sasha, Shaun, thank you very much for your time and sharing the project. Have a nice afternoon, and thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.